Hello and welcome. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on venture capital. It's this high-stakes financial engine that's quietly powering so many of the companies we use every single day. From the phone in your pocket to, believe it or not, the juice in your fridge. You might not see it, but its impact is literally everywhere. So, let's get into it.
All right, to get started, I've got a bit of a puzzle for you. Take a look at these two things. On one hand, you've got a breakfast staple that's been around for, well, forever. On the other, a symbol of cutting-edge tech. So what on earth could possibly connect them?
And the answer is venture capital. That's right. Way back in 1946, one of the very first modern VC firms took a bet on what would become Minute Maid. And then decades later, that same kind of funding helped a couple of guys in a garage turn Apple into a global powerhouse. That is the power of VC, seeing the potential and giving it the fuel to just explode.
So what is this stuff, really? Well, at its core, venture capital, or VC for short, is basically money that gets invested in brand new, unproven companies that just might have the potential to get very, very big. Now, it's not a loan. It's a high-risk, high-reward bet on an idea, on a team, and on a market. VCs are always on the hunt for that next home run.
So, how does a simple idea actually get that fuel? Okay, let's open up the VC playbook and take a look at how this whole thing works.
Okay, this is super important to understand. VC funding is not a loan. A bank, they just want their money back plus interest. Whether your business succeeds or fails, they get paid. But a venture capitalist, they actually buy a piece of your company. They take an equity stake. That means they literally become a part owner. They're in the boat with you, and they only make money if you make money. It's a real partnership.
The whole journey for a startup usually follows a pretty clear path. It all starts with seed money, which is just enough cash to see if an idea has legs. If it does, the startup goes for a Series A from a big VC firm. That's when things get serious. They start building a real business. After that, you've got more growth rounds to help them scale and go global. And the final goal for the VC, that's the exit, selling their piece of the company for a huge profit, usually when the company goes public in an IPO or gets bought by someone bigger.
So who are the people making these billion-dollar bets? Well, think of it like a sports team. At the very top, you have the general partners, or GPs. They run the show and make the final calls. Then you have principals and associates, who are kind of like the scouts, out there finding the companies and crunching all the numbers. And finally, you have venture partners. They're like expert consultants brought in for their specific knowledge and connections.
For decades, venture capital was pretty much a Silicon Valley story. But that is just not true anymore. The whole playbook is going global, and it's being adapted in some really fascinating ways.
And this VC playbook, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. In mature markets like North America and Europe, you've got this deep, established ecosystem of talent, research, and other investors. But in emerging markets, VCs are facing a whole different world. They might be dealing with things like developing infrastructure or totally different kinds of regulations.
Let's take the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region. Countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia are strategically building these innovation hubs to move their economies away from a reliance on oil. Big initiatives like Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 are designed specifically to pull venture capital into hot sectors like fintech and renewable energy. It's creating a whole new landscape for startups over there.
And in Africa, we're seeing a really similar trend. Venture capital is just pouring into companies that are solving unique, local problems. Think about M-Pesa in Kenya. It totally revolutionized mobile payments and brought millions of people into the formal financial system. Or look at Nigeria's Flutterwave, which is making it way easier for businesses to make payments across the continent. Now, there are still huge challenges for sure, things like infrastructure and tricky regulations, but the potential is just off the charts.
Now, this focus on fintech, especially in new markets, it brings up a massive challenge. What do you do when technology is moving way faster than the law can keep up?
So here's the fundamental problem. A startup can build this brilliant new payment app, right? But if the laws are old and unclear, it creates a huge risk. Investors get really nervous because, hey, they don't know if the company they're funding could just get shut down overnight by a regulator. And that uncertainty, it can kill innovation before it even gets a chance to start.
And this puts VCs in a really tough spot. How can you write a multi-million-dollar check when you have no idea if the legal goalposts are going to move tomorrow? That kind of uncertainty is a massive wall for investment.
So, to solve this exact problem, governments and regulators came up with this really ingenious solution. They call it the regulatory sandbox. Let's take a look inside. A regulatory sandbox is basically a safe space for innovation. It's a special framework that allows a fintech company to launch a new product to a limited number of real customers, all while the financial regulator is watching closely. It's like a live experiment where companies can prove their tech works and regulators can learn about it, all without putting the entire financial system at risk.
And yeah, the whole point of the sandbox is to get rid of that dangerous uncertainty. By creating clear rules for the experiment, it removes all those legal gray areas and just de-risks the whole process, both for the startup and for its investors.
The process is actually pretty straightforward. A company applies to test out its new product. Then, it gets to test it on a limited number of real people. All the while, regulators are watching closely, making sure consumers are protected. And if the test is a success, the company graduates, and it's ready to launch to the whole market, but this time with full regulatory approval.
Okay, it's a brilliant idea in theory, but this is where it gets really interesting. We now have the data to see if this big policy experiment actually makes a difference in the real world.
So, here it is, the multi-billion-dollar question. Does creating one of these sandboxes actually convince venture capitalists to open up their wallets? The answer is a huge, resounding yes. Research that looked at 9 countries that adopted sandboxes found that on average, the total amount of money invested in fintech shot up by almost 38% after the sandbox was introduced. That is a massive signal that this thing is working.
But wait, look at this. The data gets even crazier. The average size of each individual investment deal soared by over 86%. Now, this is incredibly important. It means VCs aren't just making more bets, they're making much bigger, more confident bets.
So the verdict is in, and it's crystal clear. The sandbox works. By clearing away that fog of regulatory uncertainty, it gives investors the confidence they need to write much bigger checks. And this doesn't just fund more startups, it funds more mature, ambitious projects, and it accelerates the entire fintech ecosystem.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. We've just seen how powerful this model is for financial technology. So where else could we use it? Self-driving cars? Artificial intelligence? Healthcare tech? If a sandbox can successfully balance innovation and safety in one of the world's most complex industries, well, the possibilities are pretty much endless.